Howdy there. My name is Crow. I am an artist who buys way too many art books, ranging from video games, TV shows, anime, or any other of my nerdy interests. I figured, since I have all these, why not showcase and recommend some art books to other nerdy artists out there and hope they give you a little inspiration. This is the Otaku Artist Bookshelf. My favorite series in the past, 10 years has been Delicious in Dungeon, or Dungeon Meshi, right? And these are books that had come out a while back in Japanese, but we finally have English versions of these that came out about 2 months ago, I want to say, maybe 3 months ago. If you were a fan of the anime, you should definitely check out the manga, but something interesting that I really enjoy is that Ryoko Kui did this guide, this world guide that also doubles as supplemental art book. So there's this one, which is the world guide, and has a lot of good world building fantasy stuff in it. There's also Daydream Hour, Doodles by Ryoko Kui. Now this book in particular, I always recommend these kind of books. And why I recommend them is because instead of focusing on just a finished illustration, what these books do is show you the doodle process or the iterative process of a lot of mangaka. In my old Yo-Yo Shinari video, you saw that I shared one of his books, which was a sketchbook. It was just all incidental sketches he did in between production work that he drew on animation paper, right? And this is little doodles by Ryoko Kui, sketches and stuff revolving around Dungeon Meshi and little incidental things in it, right? And we're gonna go through this a little bit first. I'm not gonna show off the entirety of it because the whole point of this is that I want to get people to go out and actually buy these art books and study them if you're an artist, or just if you're a fan to enjoy the quality of the work. But if you're an artist, to study them, because there's so much material in this that will help you when it comes to getting ideas for yourself and also borrowing techniques. So right off the bat with these books, you have a foreword by the artists themselves, and then you have going into all the sketches, and the cool thing about this is that it kind of expands into multiple places, and you can see, as far as I know, Ryoko Kui believe they do a lot of their art digitally, right? And you can kind of see that here. There's a lot of digital, kind of sketch work going on here. And you're seeing a lot of these very simple, sketches that are you might be wondering, it's okay, well, what is the point of all these, right? And it's character interactions, which is important if you're making a story that's extremely character driven, right? Like Dungeon Meshi. These stories revolve around how you perceive the characters, how the characters interact with each other, and the relationships that tie into them. So you can see the way that some characters kind of, treat a certain character. For example, this character is supposed to be a noble. So he has people waiting on him. He has people watching him delivering stuff and whatnot. And, the way he interacts with people who are a little bit more not as, respectful as the others and whatnot, or antagonistic. And it's something that I feel like if you are somebody writing a story with many characters, you need to pay attention to, because you need to show off how are these characters going to interact in this specific situation? How are these characters going to interact with these specific other characters? Do they like these characters? Do they hate them? Do they feel indifferent towards them? Are they a little grumpy at them? Something like that. And it's really important because it helps you build upon that. Character interaction are important. And the more you're able to kind of flesh that out beforehand, or as you're going, the more, the better it is for you as a writer or as a storyteller, especially if you're making something extremely character driven, right? And because a lot of, Dungeon Meshi is based off D&D parties, it's very easy to ignore certain characters and not flesh them out as much. But Ryoko Kui does a very good job at presenting the characters in a simple fashion and then fleshing them out in a way where they feel very real. This artwork is also one of my favorites. I remember seeing this a long time ago when the manga was first coming out, of all the characters with their outfits swapped. It's very good, and it also shows it shows a lot of character. It shows a lot of the way that they kind of, their personalities shine, right? You see how Marcel is like not too confident with like the more barbarian type armor. You see you know, Senshi like looking a little bit like kind of just like, you know, exposed because he's not wearing his usual like big armor. You know, you see Chilchuck looking just feeling embarrassed because this stuff does not suit him at all. And then you have Fallon and Laos who just feel okay because they're kind of indifferent to whatever they're wearing. You know, they're just very confident in themselves. And I think that shows a lot about their personality. But you have like a lot of things like this in these books where characters' outfits get swapped. You know, things like, oh, what's a good page? Things like this page where you're seeing, this is a really cool one that I like that Ryoko Kui does, which is characters, but they're different fantasy races within the same world. So like Fallon as a human, Fallon as an elf, Fallon as a halfling, and then as a dwarf and a gnome, you know? And you can see all the characters in the different ways that they look, depending on like, you know, what they would be. And it's really cool for showing like diversity or how you would, you know, interpret one character in many ways. Like this one is very, you know, I forget what the character's name is, but this dwarf character, you never see her eyes during the actual, well, you do see her eyes every once in a while, but her face is mostly hidden by her hair. And this is one of the few times you actually get to see what her eyes look like, you know? And I think that that's really interesting. And you got a lot of like incidental stuff, like how would kobolds look like without their armor, like full body. Characters with different hairstyles, like shorter hair, characters with longer hair who have shorter hair, things like that. This is, I feel, something that is so important to artists, because we often get stuck in this rut, right? We often get stuck drawing the same things over and over again, and we get you know, stiff. We get complacent in that, and then we often feel burnt out because we're not doing anything different. But I think it's important to make these little incidental doodles that are just fun, that are just character interactions, that are just little gags, that are just, you know, whatever, because it helps us kind of loosen up. It helps us keep the story alive and keep it interesting. So this is something, this book is definitely one that I recommend to people who want to have that kind of, you know, interaction. And here's characters in their like underwear. Essentially, what would the fantasy underwear look like? And I think it's really interesting. One of my favorite illustrations of Fallon. 100%. Ryoko Kui knows how to draw beautiful women. There you go. And then here's the dudes too. If you wanted to get some like anatomy studies and some rendering and whatnot, depending on like, you know, what you're going for. And these kind of explorations are super important because they also allow you to have like a pool to like a kind of box to pull from if you feel like you're stumped. Like if you draw multiple outfits, it's just doodles for fun, like go on Pinterest or whatever, and then you pull from them and then put characters in them. It allows you to have this kind of like, you know, this carousel in your mind of things you can pull from, or look through archives or sketches that you made and be like, oh, I did draw them in this outfit, maybe I can use this outfit for a different part or something inspired by that, you know? And it's fun. And it also, stuff like this where you're seeing them in more simplified forms, also helps you understand the shape language of each character as well. So that when you're drawing them in simple ways, especially if you're doing something like a comic, you can get the idea of which character you're drawing just based off the shapes of them, you know? Well-roundedness comes from just fun, you know? Because you need to truly enjoy what you're making in order to bring its full potential forward. You need to be able to say, what would my characters look like if they were wearing Halloween costumes? What would they dress up as, you know? Would they dress up as monsters from within the dungeon? Okay, what monsters would they be and why, you know? Like, you know, it's a fun exploration onto like more to the characters and how you can have fun with them. Like I said, it keeps things endlessly interesting and it always brings you back so that you don't experience burnout as much. And trust me, I've fallen into that pitfall before as well. But sometimes you got to do stuff like this. It helps. It also, you know, it makes people a little bit more interested in your character as well when you're able to flesh them out more like this. There's a whole sequence of, how does Marcel put on some winter clothing? And there you go. Or things like this. Again, back to the shape language. What do you do if you decide to simplify all the characters into much more simpler shapes? And you get this. Right? It's so fun. But Ryoko Kui in general is a master at this sort of stuff. And you could tell that there's years and years of knowledge of just skill being built up over time, you know, like this adoration for fantasy, the works of not just like, you know, Japanese fantasy, but a lot of Western fantasy, especially. I believe one of their inspirations was things like wizardry and like what was the other one? It was wizardry, it was D&D, it was, you know, several other like older fantasy things, because, you know, getting a like a hand on Western fantasy stuff in Japan was actually a lot harder than people would think. So they had to make do with a lot of like, you know, iterations of things, like how D&D became, you know, Record of Lotus War and stuff like that. You know, it was just different. And so it was more, I guess, appealing to them to see this type of fantasy. And you can tell that there is a just general fondness for this type of, you know, not only this, but just in general portrayals of people in just everyday scenarios. Like Ryoko Kui has this fondness for just like showing characters off in like a normal day-to-day kind of, you know, setting, and making these fun little comics as well. Like I said, not everything needs to be this major thing. Sometimes it could just be a little comic you made for fun, show characters interacting, what it would be like if they win a hot pot, things like that. That is Daydream Hour. I recommend this 100% for any artist out there who feels like they struggle with doodling or just having these little fun things to draw in the downtime in between like major art pieces. It's okay to doodle in the margins of your work, and it's actually encouraged. And then when you want to actually start breaking things down in a more serious way, you go to this, which is the Adventurer's Bible. And what this is, at first you would look at it and be like, oh, what even is this, right? This is, for all intents and purposes, more supplemental material on the world, but more of a guide as to how the world works. So if you're building a fantasy world or a fantasy setting, and you're like, okay, let me make a character profile. What is their preference? What is their backstory? Similar to like a D&D background, like a character sheet. That's what you're making here with these characters, right? And it especially works in like a fantasy setting. And here you have even the character relationship web and whatnot, and how they all like interact. You chronicle the character and their backstory, their likes, their dislikes, and stuff like that, and you start building from there, right? And then further down, once you get past all the character stuff, you have things like objects in the world, which is a lot of artists, especially very character artists, you're not really fond of drawing, you know, rooms and like lots of like objects and whatnot, but they also help to flesh out characters' backgrounds, their habits, their environments, where they grew up in, where they live, how do they live, you know, like how do their rooms look and whatnot. And it gives you a lot of insight onto the character themselves. You know, are they somebody who's very tidy and like particular about their room? Are they somebody who can live a very simple life? You know, are they somebody who, you know, enjoy just having a lot of stuff around them? And it helps you paint an image of the person in your mind, right? Or if people are sharing a space, like what does it look like when they're sharing a space and whatnot, and little breakdowns of all that stuff. And then, hey, let's get into the actual monsters. What are they like? What is the breakdown of these creatures and what they do and whatnot? Like, you know, when you're building a fantasy world, it really helps a lot to be able to kind of go through like a lot of these and be like, what does that chimera look like? What is the you know, like what is going on here? What is the makeup, the biology of it? And having this sort of, you know, almost like a nature documentary style representation of things. And I recommend this book in particular for that kind of stuff, because it really helps you kind of organize things, or, you know, in a sense it is like a Bible. And I think that if you are writing a very big, because a lot of people, I'm gonna be real, a lot of artists love creating worlds and lore and stuff like that for their stories, and so they'll often get carried away and will write like a billion things or create a bunch of monsters or a bunch of scenarios and whatnot, and will often lose track of it. And I think it's important to create a book that is like a Bible for you, that is like, imagine if you were in the world yourself, going through these adventures, going through these like fantasy settings, and you know, kind of chronicling the monsters, their habitats, their habits, their eating habits, and stuff like that. Now, do you always have to go that in depth? No, you can make it very simple. You can definitely be very concise with it, but I think it's important to be able to have like a frame of reference for when you want to go back to it and whatnot. Because a lot of the time, the pitfall that a lot of these, you know, artists, storytellers, mangaka, and comic artists fall into is that they've been writing a series for so long that they forget some things that happen, and when they have to go back and like reference it, they realize that they've written themselves into a corner. So it's good to have this sort of way to kind of go back and, you know, be a little bit more planned for these sort of things. Now, not saying that you can't be spontaneous and that there isn't, like, you know, some merit in that, but at the same time, I think it's important to have, I think it's very important to have a reference for these things as time goes on. So not as necessary, but I think something that helps, especially if you are writing a very, very complicated and complex story with many characters, is to have a sort of Bible sort of thing to kind of, you know, reference whenever you want to expand on certain things, like the culture of a certain people or whatnot within your fantasy story. Yeah, it's really useful. So that's my recommendation, especially if you are a big fan of Delicious in Dungeon, to check out this one. I would show you more of this, but there are spoilers in this book for the main series, so if you haven't caught up, be careful about this one. This one, less so. It has spoilers in it, but it does have doodles of characters that probably have not shown up in the anime yet, as of, you know, me doing this showcase. But if you don't mind that and just want to see more of these cool art and these cool characters, I recommend these two books, and that's one of my little art book recommendations. These are not quite on the same level as the other art books that I usually show off, but I think they're important. Little books like these help out a lot, and I usually have them on my desk or somewhere nearby that I can reference them whenever I feel like I'm stuck, you know? I think it's important to always kind of go back, because you could go online and you could Google stuff and you can find images, but I think it's also really cool to have a physical, like a physical version of the thing that you can cross-reference, especially in this day and age where it's like it's harder to find like actual authentic pieces of work by creators because of the onslaught of like slop online. So it's like, you know, having the actual physical media here that I can constantly reference, I think is super cool. There's a classroom setting would have made a PowerPoint with bullet points to accompany this. Well, I mean, that's usually how my YouTube videos are, but for the most part, this is me kind of improvising and giving you like my just honest feelings about why I like these books. I could give you, like, I try to be as technical as possible into why some of these books would benefit you, but I think what's important is more of just what drew me to them, and maybe that'll be the same reason you got drawn to it, right? And in these cases, I hope that anything I explained in terms of that, even if you're not an artist or like whatever, if you're a storyteller and you just want to be able to write more interesting stories, kind of write little incidental scenarios of your characters and whatnot, or if you're somebody who wants to make like a D&D campaign and wants to make it somewhat interesting and a little bit more in depth than just something like, you know, everybody got dysentery in the tavern or something, you know, and you want to expand on it and like make it a little bit more fun. I think having these kind of books or these kind of, you know, representations of those kind of fantasy settings is really good and helpful and just fun, you know. But as an artist, I think that this is beneficial to people who get kind of stuck creatively and don't know what to do a lot of the time. So, you know, doodle often, doodle for fun, doodle for yourself, doodle because it makes you happy. So yeah, that is my recommendation.